Welcome to Biblioventures, Monsters and Ghosts. I am Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenbach Museum and Library in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and we are going on a biblioventure through the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and in a few weeks, A Christmas Carol. This is episode 4 on Jekyll and Hyde, and returning as co-host is Olivia Retigliano. Hi, Olivia.
Hi, Ed. Thank you so much for having me again.
Thank you for coming back.
Always.
Yeah, well, that's always a treat for me. Like, I hope they come back. Well, and you have, so thank you. Welcome to everybody watching. I see from all over the place, Southwest Michigan, Richmond, Virginia, Wyoming, Denver, Washington, D.C., Philly, the Philly suburbs, New Mexico, Bryn Mawr. So it's great to have people all over the place watching this. And if you are all watching live right now, as you probably know, please like and subscribe to this channel, like these videos, and have fun in the live chat. It's a real added bonus to watch it live, is to do the live chat with everyone else. If you're watching the recording, I also ask you to please like these videos, subscribe to this channel, and welcome to any new viewers. There's people still registering for the show, so I know people are still jumping in. I hope you enjoyed the show. All the episodes are available to watch on this YouTube channel, so it's easy to just catch up anytime. We bring this show free of charge to you, but if you would please consider making a donation to the Rosenbach, it would be much appreciated. If you have already donated or joined as a member of the Rosenbach, thank you so much. That's how we get to do this show for free, because of your support for the Rosenbach. So if you have not already donated or become a member, I invite you to do so. And we are continuing our special offer all throughout this show. If you become a member the day of the live stream of the show, you will receive an additional month added to your membership. That's 13 months instead of 12. So there's a little incentive to join. But the biggest incentive is to support this show, to support the Rosenbach, and help us care for our collections as well. I see we haven't, Claire is joining us from New Zealand as well. So now we're all over the world officially. We're officially all over the world with tonight's episode. Olivia, it is time for cocktails. And mine tonight is made with this special Empress gin. So every episode features a Jekyll and Hyde cocktail and mocktail recipes for all of you, designed by Jobi Zink, who is the registrar and associate director of collections at the Rosenbach. We wear many hats there, and then sometimes staff of the Rosenbach is also a mixologist for the show. You can find the recipes in the YouTube description for each episode, and I send out the recipe via email every week. If you're registered for the show, you can register at Biblioventures homepage on the rosenbach.org. And then you can have the drink ahead of time. I saw someone a couple people in the audience, Victoria and Gretchen, are both making the drink with this Empress gin tonight, this indigo gin. And it is, Olivia, it's lemon juice and grapefruit juice and some simple syrup. And now I can't do this high enough to really show, but then I'm going to try to layer it. Layering is touch and go with me. You pour it over a back of a spoon, and then it'll kind of make a nice layer on top, and also spill all over my desk, which I'm doing right. So there we go. Oh, there we go. I did a pretty good job. Good thing I have paper towels already, and there it is.
Beautiful.
Now you can see the color changing here, and as this mixes, it will change even more.
Beautiful.
And this drink is called the Jekyll and Hyde. We finally get to see the potion in action in the story tonight, and so we have a drink also that changes colors. Let me put a little grapefruit slice in here. I wonder if that'll change the pH of it as well, because that's what happens. The indigo gin is made with butterfly pea blossoms, and they're one of the botanicals. And they have a pigment that changes color depending on acidity. So you change the pH level, you change the color of the drink. But we wanted to make this mixed here at double here, the duality of Jekyll and Hyde, the duality of man, as Jekyll insists is going on. And you can top this with soda too. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to drink gin and juice.
Cheers.
Cheers. I just drank juice, so then I'll gradually get to the gin part. Let me pull my
Yeah, you'll get there. It'll be a more interesting show as the night goes on.
Yeah, as they all are.
Yeah. Well, this is a nice way to like tease the, chemical alchemical elements of today's discussion too.
Yes, absolutely. So I thought this. Thank you, Jobi, for making a drink that does this very well. And so it's good to see you. Anything new?
Nothing.
We didn't chat beforehand. Like, okay, what's our chat gonna be? I was talking about the show, but we didn't do the chat part.
Okay, how are you?
Pre-interviews are important, everyone, when you do a show. But I imagine you're busy with all kinds of writing projects and editing like Lit Hub and all of that.
Yes, very busy. If anyone's in New York, I'm co-hosting. I'm hosting a Q&A of a screening at the Brooklyn Public Library next Saturday at 8 p.m. It's a screening of the new documentary about Norman Mailer, How to Come Alive with Norman Mailer, directed by Emmy and Peabody winner Jeff Zimbalist. And I will be hosting the Q&A afterwards with several of Mailer's family members, including his son, John Buffalo, and his sister, who is 97. And it's gonna be great. So not Victorian, not at all relevant to Jekyll and Hyde, but an interesting, controversial figure with a duality that was very public in 20th century culture. So if you're interested in people who have lived complicated lives and have different personas throughout time, Norman Mailer is one of them. And you can come and visit us at the Brooklyn Public Library Central Branch next Saturday, 8
Very much so. All righty. Easy to look up. If you have a link and throw it in our chat, then our chat pool, Brianna can throw it in for everybody else. I had an interesting, this is an old thing that I'm bringing up because in the summer I got this and I forgot to bring it up on the shows. And then because I work at the Rosenbach and then I do these shows from home, there's all these transfer materials all the time. And this got stuck in like a pile of papers. Jessica P., who watches this show and also watches, has watched other shows. I think she watches Pickwick, she did Sherlock, I don't know how many shows, but she made a bookmark from me. And it says, read, drink, repeat, Edward G.
Beautiful.
So, which is something I've said on the show before, and it's a phrase I live by. And thank you, Jessica. And it's all these little it's bottles and books and glasses all behind this here. So
beautiful.
Very nice. Thank you so much, Jessica, for making that. And I'm sorry you got to thank you so late for this. So. I had a question. There was a question in the chat last week too, Olivia. Somebody asked if that was Stevenson, and yes, it is. This is Stevenson back here looking over us. I don't want to pull it down, so I'm not going to be able to get back up again. And that was from a photo by his stepson Lloyd Osborne, taken while they were living at Skerryvore in Bournemouth. So Stevenson is in his mid-30s there. And it's one of my favorite pictures of him. And I didn't have it up for the first show, maybe the first two, I can't remember. And then I finally put it up. So he's overhanging. All the people from the past shows are all overlooking us anyway. So in current shows. So and here's an interesting question, Olivia. We can chat about this for a second. Lauren Ann asked in the chat about this novel. I think we were talking about genres or gothic and horror or whatever. And she said, isn't this more science fiction?
Fascinating. I don't think so, but I would be interested to hear your answer and then explain mine, Ed.
I think it is, but I also think it's one of those, kind of Frankenstein is science fiction, but it's an early science fiction and it's also very gothic. And
yeah,
you know, and it has other things going on. It's like a travel log. And there's other things going on in it as well. And I think that rings true with this too. Um, of course, Stevenson doesn't know what science fiction is, because no one's used that or come up with that as a genre to market books, or to think of how the kind of, you know, themes and ideas that this book would adhere to. For him, it's a shilling shocker.
Yeah, exactly. I think, I mean, it's somewhat, it's always interesting, but it's ultimately somewhat futile to try to like corral Victorian genres because they were all developing so much at the same time and there was so much overlap that like any categorical distinction doesn't, you know, necessarily do much for us now. I don't think of it as science fiction in the sort of like, I don't know, backwards looking Victorianist understanding that I have, mostly because, you know, H.G. Wells was writing at the same time, and H.G. Wells was pioneering a different variety of literature that I would come to associate more with like the 20th century science fiction. But it is true that Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is the story of a mad scientist, essentially. And there's like, you know, a chemical, psychological, but ultimately scientific problem that prevents, you know, someone from living like a regular normal life. I mean, it's sort of like prototypical body horror if we're going to be using modern distinctions. It's like a David Cronenberg movie. It's like The Fly or Videodrome or something like that.
Mhm.
Or, you know, someone's body is taken over and they sort of have to reckon with that. So I think it's very interesting to consider it that way. I mean, like if you look at the 19th century, I mean, absolutely Frankenstein is like the original science fiction story. And in that tradition, then absolutely Jekyll and Hyde is a science fiction story. But I don't like to think of it that way. I like to think of it as sort of like the tale, like the late Victorian gaslight gothic,
Mhm.
you know, sort of that accompany Dracula
Mhm.
and Tales of Richard Marsh or something like that.
Yeah.
Um, I think that's more how I conceive of it. I think of it very much as a tale of the city, also, as we were talking about last week. And I think Victorian science fiction is and isn't about, you know, place in that way. But Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is very much about like mapping a certain moment in Victorian, this certain Victorian moment that is very real and is not at all a sort of an imagined version
Mhm.
of London. It's
Yeah.
almost like an attempt to burrow into the city, or you know, Edinburgh or another major metropolitan place. And I think of that as a sort of distinction. I mean, not anymore like with China Miéville and like all these different novelists who play with those things, or
Yeah.
Neverwhere, Neil Gaiman. But yeah, that's sort of how I think of it. That's a long answer to your question.
And we'll get some very real sciencey things today when they mix the potions and they talk about the alkaloids, you know, that's going into it. The um, but it but it does seem to be more about the ideas of science in the late 19th century, and it's playing with some of those ideas, not only with, you know, anxiety over, you know, evolution, but also these kind of social sciences and this idea of, you know, the where your kind of physiognomy can, you could tell if someone's evil and will be a criminal,
Right.
that are all
Chronology.
developing at that time. So and those things are not necessarily, you know, gothic in a sense, or they're new gothic. You know,
Right.
what did I call this? Gothic science, and that one episode in which, you know, it's where gothic is concerned with the past haunting the present. Science gothic is about the present that will
Right.
haunt the future.
Yes.
And I think that's going on here, and I think it Stevenson wouldn't recognize this as something. If you tried to explain to him what science fiction was, I don't think he would recognize that as what he was doing with this work. Um, but but it certainly fits comfortably into those modes. So, I mean, even horror is a created genre by the 20th century. I mean, people are doing things and they'll call them gothic or thrillers or you know, those kinds of things, but they don't quite have a cohesive definition of what makes horror yet, and that takes time to evolve. Same thing with science fiction.
Exactly.
but any question that leads you to talk about how the story's put together and that kind of thing, I don't find those to be, I find those kind of things to be valuable. And I think they help you get at what's going on in a story when you talk about genres and see how it fits and what are the rules and does it work that way, and that leads to these questions that come up. So
Right.
good. Thank you, Lauren. All righty. Let's get on with our story tonight. Maybe this won't be a marathon episode, but I like the marathons. So I try not to keep my hosts up all night. Well, no, it's Paul really, right? Because he's up to like 2 a.m. doing the show. um, on with our show. We shared a PDF of the entire book on our webpage at rosenbach.org, Biblioventures, Monsters and Ghosts. There's also a PDF of the each chapters for the week. So, and this was needed because you have to know where we're stopping in the second in chapter 10 that we're doing in Jekyll's full statement. And then, so that's there for you to see on our website. When last we met, Utterson and Poole broke down the door of Jekyll's laboratory and found Hyde dead and Jekyll disappeared. Olivia, it was so much fun really watching the way Poole was getting Utterson to the point to break down the door.
Yeah.
He just gradually gets him to finally Utterson's like, we should break down the door. And Poole's like, what a great idea. Hey, there's an axe right here. So all along, Poole just wanted to just say, can you just come and break down the door?
Yeah,
And instead
exactly.
he has to go through this long thing because he's a servant and he can't
Right.
suggest those kinds of things.
Oh, I love Mr. Poole. Yeah, that's great. They should
So,
there should be a spin-off series just about Mr. Poole. Anyway.
oh, yeah. So, well, they did Mary Riley. Well, Valerie Martin wrote the novel Mary Riley. I don't know if anybody knows this. There's a novel called Mary Riley by Valerie Martin, and it was made into a movie with Julia Roberts playing the title character and John Malkovich as Jekyll and Hyde. And it is about it's a retelling of the tale from a servant in the house, a female servant, and what she saw and how this all played out to her.
That's
And she
amazing.
went, oh, yeah, she has like this
Never heard
relationship
of
with
this.
Hyde. I remember I've been meaning to rewatch the movie, and it's I just haven't gotten to it yet. I remember I didn't love the movie, but
Yeah.
I really enjoyed the book. But frequently what I find frequently that when I watch movies now that I thought were okay in the past, I wind up loving them. I don't know what it is, but um so I want to rewatch that. But it's an interesting one that gives us a different perspective, and it's very much the servant's perspective, which I absolutely love in this. Malkovich is great in it, as I recall. So but I can't
He's
remember
just
how
he's
good
crazy.
Julia I just don't know. All right,
Well,
starting to mix together. There you go.
it's beautiful. That's a beautiful, very, very bright purple.
Well, if I start to transform, that's called being drunk, but I'm not going to physically transform.
I mean, yeah. I mean, we can talk. We'll talk about more chemistry today.
Yes. Well, and so far we have in this story, we have this. There's an there are even more sealed envelopes for Utterson to read. So far, we have the sealed envelope from Lanyon to Utterson, within which was another sealed envelope that says don't open until. And then now we have Utterson finds another large sealed envelope, and then he opens it, and it has a will and a note to Utterson and Jekyll's confession, or his full statement of the case. But I keep calling it a confession. It's a confession. Um, uh, and Utterson took these papers home now to read in private instead of contacting the police after I found a dead body and Jekyll missing. I'm not going to contact the police until I read all the papers first, because he has to make sure that Jekyll doesn't suffer. And I know he's his lawyer, and I know he needs to protect him, but that's not really. It's really about just protecting him. It's not about because of his legal oath. I really don't believe. But um, first up is the sealed envelope from Lanyon. Remember when Utterson visited him last? He was at death's door, and then he died a fortnight later. But chapter 9 Lanyon, Dr. Lanyon's narrative. On the 9th of January, now I'm already going to annotate, Olivia.
Okay.
Just as a reminder of the dates in this story. It's a little hard to put together, especially because at the date of this letter in a few lines is 10th December, and that's wrong. Um, the 9th January works with the rest of the story. 10th December doesn't. He didn't write a letter to, he didn't write this and it got to him a month later. It's just a mistake. It's a typo. It's I wonder if anybody has an edition where they have actually changed the 10th December to line it up.
I
Uh,
love this. There are several typos in the beginning of Dracula also.
yeah, that it happened. There's a couple that, or at least one of the entries, the journal entries, is stated wrong, and it's wrongly, and it should be, but it's usually altered
Mhm.
for further editions, but it is it's just something they didn't catch before publication. We don't have the manuscript for that page. There's manuscripts that exist for other parts of Lanyon's narrative, but not the beginning. So we don't know if maybe that was in the manuscript or it was just maybe it was part of Stevenson making changes throughout, and then this date didn't get changed. But um, that's uh, that's all that is. But the reminder that I want to give for the dates is this January 9th. If you go through and you piece this together, and I talked about this on the last time you were on, right? That this is Jekyll has been if you put all the dates together, Jekyll's been turning to Hyde for over a year before the story opens with Utterson and Enfield talking about the story of the door. And then it's a year after that that he kills Sir Danvers Carew, and now it's in October, and now it's January, 3 months later, that Lanyon sees Hyde turn into Jekyll, and then Lanyon dies a fortnight later, and then it's another couple weeks before the final, Utterson's breaking down the door. It's 2.5, almost 3 years. It's like you can't quite put it all together. We don't have the exact beginning dates, but it's at least 2.5 or 3 years that Jekyll has been becoming Hyde. So, and 2 years just like having fun, and then he slows it up after he kills Carew. Um, Jekyll had oh, and again, it's like right, the first sentence here. On the 9th of January, I received by the evening delivery a registered envelope, another sealed envelope. What is that? I can't even count the number of sealed envelopes that people have to open, and they either discover something or they won't open them and then discover it later. But it's this constant idea, I think, that Stevenson, I think, unconsciously has, that
Yeah,
opening.
and also mail was so much more public then than it we conceive of it now. Like in the early modern period, everybody read everybody's mail. They weren't typically sealed and stuff like that. So this sealed is really underscoring that this is not to be opened by anyone. This is very mysterious. This is very important.
Right.
It's not just a
And
letter that.
and it seems one of those unconscious things that Stevenson's doing about this revelation of, written confessions and secrets that are sealed. It makes me think of here's a weird one. It makes me think of The Thing from Beyond Another World, the old Thing movie, uh,
Yeah,
with James Arness and the creature. And George Romero points this
yeah,
out in the documentary about there's constantly doors opening and closing and guarding and things coming through doors all through the movie. That movie is obsessed with doors as well. I know this story is too. Even so that on the audio track of it, the doors are constantly doing this ka-chunk, 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 ka-chunk every time they open and close. Like it's calling attention to them once you notice it's going on. I don't think it's intentional, but I think it winds up being an unconscious choice by a director to constantly say, come in this door, go out this door,
yeah.
close the door. It's behind the door. Everybody stand and watch the door. Comes through the door, and it becomes a thematic element of the story. And in this one, we clearly have the door, which has always been there until now, because
Yep.
Utterson broke the door down.
Finally.
Now doors aren't important anymore, but the
Right.
sealed envelopes, the sealed letters, the personal documents that are sealed that you have to unseal to discover is still there.
Another kind of door.
We have the letter, and it's just Jekyll reminds us they have scientific differences. But there was never a day, if you had said to me, you got to be careful, a letter like this. There was never a day you said to me, Jekyll, my life, my honor, my reason depend upon you. I would not have sacrificed my left hand to help you. So he's laying the old acquaintance honor right on the table there.
He's laying it on thick.
Yes. And he appeals to the long acquaintance, and these men help each other, even if it could be something dishonorable, which is what Jekyll says. Even if it's something dishonorable, you can judge, but you've got to help me. And then he says, you're going to go alone and get my things out of my cabinet. And people, the cabinet means a room. It's a small room. He's not talking about a cabinet like a dresser. A cabinet is the room that he has his it's the room. The cabinet is the room that Utterson broke into. And to get the potions, and he's got them all labeled in this, in the press, which is the what we now call a cabinet with the drawers. And he has to go at midnight, and then at midnight he has to then be alone in his consulting room, and then he signs the level. Your friend, H.J. Your friend, do all this alone and meet me at midnight. Don't tell anyone.
Serve me, my dear Lanyon, and save your friend.
And here's a reminder too, something I just realized this time reading this. Like this letter is written from Jekyll in Jekyll's handwriting. Now, we talked about this on the last episode. I talked about this with Paul about how his handwriting doesn't change, and Hyde has to change his writing to make it different from Jekyll's, or Jekyll does. But it also means that one of the things that Victorians thought you could really tell who somebody was and their true character was by their handwriting. And here it doesn't change at all. So the evil Hyde has the same handwriting as Jekyll. And Hyde wrote the letter. Well, he wrote the letter as Hyde. And so it's interesting that in adaptations, they're so different. They're like, it's like what becomes like the split personality, monster kind of in movies, where someone is someone else and they're completely different. And Hyde just wrote a letter just like Jekyll, and not just the handwriting, but in his thoughts and in the way he would write it. And I'm thinking it's not a masquerade, that Hyde is just because Hyde's just Jekyll. And if you can't see him, and it doesn't make a difference. If it's just by letter, it doesn't make a difference what he looks like.
Yeah, that's such a great point, Ed. That's great.
So that is so that's the letter that Lanyon gets. And his first response is, upon reading this letter, I made sure my colleague was insane. So Jekyll's nuts. These kind of instructions, yeah, he's gone over the edge. And but he says, I have to help him. I felt bound to do as he requested. And that's these men in this, right? It's Utterson and Jekyll, right, and Field and Lanyon. They have this kind of they protect their honor, and they protect them. They each protect the other from calamity, from people knowing something bad about them. So, yeah. And so he's going to do it. Gets the powders. The powders were neatly made up. Here's where we get this kind of like, it's science-y, and it's more science-y than say Mary Shelley did with Frankenstein. He'll at least give us some things here, but it really, the crystalline salt, and there's a phial half full of blood red liquor, and but also Stevenson is quite adept at drugs. and mixing them and taking them. And he's been doing this for years for all the illnesses and pain, and taking ergotine right before he's writing Jekyll and Hyde, which is just a hallucinogenic, and it's been, wreaking havoc on his mind even. His wife is very concerned about him taking the ergotine. And he hates it because he can't really write and do what he wants to do, but he has crazy dreams and he likes crazy dreams. Um, but it's Lanyon has found these things, and he's also an ordinary version book he's found, which is like a little commonplace book, a journal, which is just filled with dates over many years. Now, he mentioned early in the story, Lanyon, he told others 10 years ago, Jekyll and I had a falling out over views. So he was probably working on this for like 8 or 9 years before it actually worked.
Mm-hmm.
But and then he says that the entry ceased nearly a year ago and quite abruptly. And if you piece it together, especially with the Jekyll's account that'll follow, that's when he murders Carew, because he stops being Hyde. He stops taking the potion.
Right.
And then I found this interesting. Sometimes there's a single word that says double, 6 times, and a total of several hundred entries, and once very early in the list, and followed by several marks of exclamation, total failure. So I'm assuming that the double means he had to take a double dose to probably change back into Jekyll. But that interesting that it was very early that there was a failure.
Mm-hmm.
That this hasn't been a smooth process, obviously. And even in the midst of him changing into Hyde sometimes, it's something went wrong and it didn't work. And the powders too remind me of Stevenson's dreams. Because the potion is the one thing, or the powders is the one thing that Stevenson dreamt, and it really influenced or inspired this story. We've talked about this before, but this is a good place to bring it up again. Let me share this couple excerpts from letters. I can make them bigger. This was in a publication called The Critic in 10th September 1887. This is him just coming to America, and he comes to America and he's interviewed, and this is the interview he gives, and here I have it in red. For instance, all I dreamed about Dr. Jekyll, as he would have said, was that one man was being pressed into a cabinet, a little room, when he swallowed a drug and changed into another being. I awoke and said at once that I had found the missing link for which I had been looking so long, and before I again went to sleep, almost every detail of the story as it stands was clear to me. Of course, writing it was another thing. And then later in 87, I have 1887, a chapter on dreams, was published in 88, but he wrote it in 87. He writes, I dreamed the scene at the window and a scene afterwards split in two, in which Hyde, pursued for some crime, took the powder and underwent the change in the presence of his pursuers. So we're kind of getting that here. We will with Lanyon, but I talked about this with Paul last week, Olivia. May I see what you have to say? I dreamed the scene at the window. Is that the maid looking out and seeing Carew being murdered, or is that the scene where they talk to Jekyll and he starts to transform and he runs back in and shuts the window? I'm not sure.
That's a question. So I thought the first time when I read this, like 5 minutes before we started, I thought it was the scene with Carew, but actually now I think it's the second one. Because this suggests the actual doubling, the actual removal of the mantra. Yeah, I think it's the second one. That's
it, it,
fascinating.
it makes sense for the other part of it too, that,
Yeah, it does.
pursued taking the powder. He's already mentioned
Yeah, yeah,
the powder, taking the potion, the change. So that's a key part, and that's, a key part of these two chapters. He shows it twice. Um,
yeah.
and
Fascinating.
but there,
I also I love in that recording when he says that he's looking to find a body or a vehicle for the 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 strong sense of a man's being double, a
yeah,
man's double being, which must, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's so interesting that the essence in need of a body is the pathway to this story as opposed to a body sort of, and we're looking for characteristics that make it memorable or something like that. It just sort of underscores like the strange corporeality of Jekyll and
yeah,
Hyde story. And the most important thing is sort of like the psychology, and then the physical form it takes is in service of the psychology as opposed to the other way around,
yeah.
which relates to the fact that this came to him in dreams.
And we had this a phrasing very like this, and when he was writing about his friend Walter Ferrier drinking, remember,
Yep.
in one envelope, and he used envelope too
Oh,
as a being, uh,
yeah.
to have these two sides, and it's something that he's really working on. And then he says that he had written this story called The Traveling Companion, but it was, returned because it was on the plea that it was a work of genius and indecent, and he burned it, and then Jekyll, supplanted it. This is why I think this is a good clue, and Christopher Fraylingham pointed this out,
Mhm.
studying this novel,
The
that
great.
that the good Sir Christopher Frayling.
Yes. Yeah.
You can watch an episode of Sundays with Dracula where I talk to Sir Christopher Frayling. Comes over the very last chapter of Dracula. We
Amazing.
talk about the but for this, he says this sounds like what Fanny says 20 years after, Stevenson is dead, that, that he burned a manuscript of Jekyll, and, it wasn't right. And she may have, this easily could have been remembered then that way.
Mhm.
But there you go. But that's all we'll do with that. Lanyon is, so we have this diary of dates, and now Lanyon looks through all this, and now the more I reflected, the more convinced I grew that I was dealing with a case of cerebral disease. Now he knows Jekyll is crazy.
Right.
What? From that, but this is another doctor looking at it, and I
Yeah.
think him realizing that this is not the way a doctor, at least for Lanyon, this isn't the way a doctor is supposed to go about experimenting. That this is clearly a personal project, um, and he dismissed his servants and loads an old revolver. So he's going to be ready here for someone he thinks. Now, what Jekyll told him is somebody else is going to show up, so he's ready for him. And then Hyde turns up, um, knocks on the door. He finds a small man crouching against the pillars outside. And then he comes in, he gives a look back because there's a policeman not far off, and, very furtive, very cliched too, like you see it in the movie, you'd be like, come on, but it's in the story. Uh, uh, and then Lanyon, he says, I kept my hand ready on my weapon,
Yeah.
uh, which makes me think of Moriarty saying, Mr. Holmes, you don't need to have your hand on that revolver.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
dressing
Yeah.
down pocket.
I mean, this whole story. We'll talk about this later, but the story is like it reeks of Sherlockian details in such a fascinating way. We discuss later, but whenever someone's in a laboratory or a cabinet, my mind immediately goes to Sherlock Holmes.
Well, I think Doyle is immensely influenced by Stevenson.
Doyle's extremely well read. He's a doctor. There's no way he wouldn't have read this. There's no way he wouldn't have known this. And I'm positive.
Oh, he did read it, and he did know it, and Stevenson wrote to him, and all that. They exchanged letters, but also Doyle revered Stevenson as a writer, as most of the young writers did.
Yeah. How could you not?
Um, Hyde is small. he has a shock. There is a shocking expression of his face, great muscular activity, and great apparent debility of constitution, with the odd subjective disturbance caused by his neighborhood. I love Lanyon's language here, and I like the way Stevenson has moved into the language of somebody else. This doctor using these kinds of words to describe what's going on with somebody, but also his own symptoms in encountering Hyde, right? He says he has this bore some resemblance to incipient rigor and was accompanied by a marked sinking of the pulse. He's talking about his own symptoms
Himself, yeah.
and encountering him. Rigor was a medical term then for a sudden chill or shivering, which I got from one of the old Norton Critical edition in the note. So I'm assuming it's right. Because none of the other annotateds have the note for the rigor. That was the only one.
That's
Even
great.
the new Norton doesn't have that note. So
it's a freezing because and rigor mortis. I mean, that
yeah,
freezing body and death. Yeah.
And his pulse changes, and he says the cause, though, but I have since had reason to believe the cause to lie much deeper in the nature of man and to turn on some nobler hinge than the principle of hatred. That it's not just like I thought I hate this guy, or that it's about the nature of man. It's about nobility. And Hyde is the threat, the threat of this kind of uncivilized savage from which we have evolved from. We, meaning the people here, have evolved from, and now that's the Darwinian anxiety that I always talk about going on here. Hyde represents that devolution. Disgustful curiosity. Only Lanyon could come up with that term now. What struck in me, what I can only describe as a disgustful curiosity. And because he's also he's very interested. He's very curious about this being as a research doctor or whatever kind of medical man he is. He should be. And then he says there was something abnormal and misbegotten in the very essence of the creature. And now I can't help start thinking about Frankenstein. And there's so many little Frankenstein nods in this one. And that's kind of the first one here. Something abnormal and misbegotten in the very essence of the creature. The same kind of thing that the creature in Frankenstein faces.
Mm-hmm. And he, I mean, literally he says, something seizing, surprising, and revolting. That is the response that Dr. Frankenstein has when he sees the creature. He flees from it.
Yeah.
He abjures its company.
And everybody has that reaction.
Yeah. Everyone's like, get away. And that's Hyde.
And this is interesting, though, but from Lanyon, he's also curious. He's also very interested, and he needs to know what this is. And usually that's not what happens in these kinds of stories. But so, I mean, in a sense, Lanyon seems to be the real scientist of all these people.
Yes.
That, I need to figure out what this is. Let me mark down what's going on here very, objectively, and my symptoms, and figure out why they're going on. He's come up with a hypothesis, but then Hyde touches him, and it's like, whoa, conscious at his touch of a certain icy pang along my blood.
It's so good.
And then he's like, you have to sit, and Hyde I could hear his teeth grate with the convulsive action of his jaws. That's really paying attention to what's going on here, but it's another animalistic kind of thing, description of Hyde that we have all through this story. And then compose yourself. Their language is funny. This is funny here, right? I mean, it's not. It is.
Yeah, it is. It's
I beg your pardon. I beg your pardon, Dr. Lanyon, he replied civilly enough.
It's the way that Hyde is given to us as a creature, he's given to us in these like almost animalistic, like, inhuman alien terms, and then like their interactions are so forced into this sort of gentlemanly banter. It's so amusing.
And Hyde can do this because he is Jekyll. Like just like he can write the letter, he
Yeah,
can choose to speak like I beg your pardon. What you
right.
say is very well founded, and my impatience has shown its heels to my politeness. I mean, Hyde can do that. No, and it's a shame no real adaptation ever does that. The show that Hyde can like, he'll still look like Hyde, but I can play the part of a gentleman because I am one. Um,
Exactly.
and then but he still can't help his teeth grating, the convulsive action of his jaws. um and then when he finds out that he's got he sees the contents of the drawer with the chemicals, he uttered one loud sob of such immense release. um that this is it's the we heard him crying for mercy, and Paul heard him crying in the last chapter. Um, and here he is again with a very kind of unevil reaction to something, right? This relief that Hyde feels. Now, of course, now I can, evade the police, of course, you could say. Um, but he has these feelings at least, or
Yeah.
Jekyll has these feelings. I mean, this is all what we're getting to at this point in the story. Um, He thanked me with a smiling nod. Like that doesn't like if I said he thanked with smiling, you're not gonna think that's about Hyde. That's Hyde.
It's
Hyde
high.
does that. So
Exactly.
he is like that. And then he mixes the potion. Um uh the mixture, which was at first, oh look, I've changed. Yeah, it's gotten lighter. That's
Ah,
also
it's beautiful. And you can see that orange through it, more clearly now.
that's a grapefruit slice.
Oh, it's grapefruit zest. I'm sorry.
Yeah. All right.
I can't tell my grapefruits from my oranges.
There you go. You have to drink these juices to know. So, the mixture, which was at first of a reddish hue, began in proportion as the crystals melted to brighten in color, to effervesce audibly, and to throw off small fumes of vapor. Suddenly, at the same moment, the ebullition ceased and the compound changed to a dark purple. It's in my bottle. Um, uh, and which faded again more slowly to a watery green. We couldn't get that color out of this. Sorry. Uh, this is now like a story of alchemy, right?
Yeah,
I mean, and this is interesting where this is an iconic moment in the story, and the real use of the word iconic too, in that it is a scene you recognize over time, and it has this particular meaning. It's the mad scientist scene,
yeah,
um, and this is not where it comes from originally. This kind of scene comes from plays about alchemists and stories about alchemists and doing those things. But here, this in particular now, which we frequently get, is that him drinking the potion.
right,
Um, the transformation is in himself. He's not trying to transform something else, as
right.
the alchemists would do. Um, is where these stories are now. These are stories about inner self and the transformations that you can happen to you. This is where the monster is. You're not creating it out there; it's in you. Um,
Yeah. Um, it it's so interesting too because the novel features this interesting theme of like cobbling together an identity from sort of disparate parts of the self, but also literally in the case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, the appearance of two people. And one of the things that I think about, or when I was thinking about when I was reading Dr. Lanyon's uh narrative in preparation for this, is that the detective figure in this novel is split across all these characters. So when I was here 2 weeks ago and we were talking about Utterson, we were talking about Utterson in the context of a detective. But I mean, literally, Poole is the one who's, seen stuff and wants to break down the door. And then like most critically, Dr. Lanyon is the one who gets the the big climactic reveal of the story, and who figures out some stuff but is also privy to this sort of like criminal mastermind unveiling, revealing. And I think it's so interesting because like in Sherlock Holmes, occasionally Watson hops in and offers like a useful medical diagnosis, and he's he is able to augment the detective process. with, in conjunction with Holmes's natural deductive and scientific abilities. But I think it's interesting in this that sort of what we would get of a detective figure is sort of fractured in even more ways. We need an actual doctor to conduct one part of the investigation, a friend, a lawyer to conduct another part, that all of these things, a lawyer, a doctor, and someone who's a servant who's like embedded and constantly watching, all of those equal a detective. All of those professions are the sort of manifestation of what like justice looks like, or the law, or some sort of moral or like legal intersection that provides this purview. I think that's just such an interesting foil to the sort of like chemical criminality we get split across Jekyll and Hyde.
You know that when Bram Stoker is writing Dracula, he comes up with an original cast of characters, and in that, and he doesn't use these characters. There is a detective named Cotford. There is a psychical research agent named Alfred Singleton, and there is a German professor named Max Windeschaffel. And what he realizes is, because they're all not in the novel, but they're all Van Helsing.
Yeah.
And I can combine those things into this one figure.
Yeah. Actually, nobody knows that about Dracula. And it's one of my favorite details. Are they in Bram Stoker's, those details in Bram Stoker's notes?
They're in the notes. They're in the notes that you can see at the Rosenbach in Bram Stoker's Notes for Dracula, over 100 pages of early research ideas, outlines, things that he didn't use in the story, typed research notes, the first time he came across the name Dracula. It's all there in the notes. We have that at the Rosenbach. Anybody can come and see it.
Amazing.
All righty. Thank you for that. That's where we're going down this road here. All over. I love it. Now we get to Hyde's warning speech before he takes the potion. Do you want to read the warning speech? I love the warning speech.
Yes,
now
sure.
Said he.
Yes, right here. And now, said he, to settle what remains. Will you be wise? Will you be guided? Will you suffer me to take this glass in my hand and go forth from your house without further parley? Or is the greed of curiosity too much command of you? Think before you answer, for it shall be done as you decide. As you decide, you shall be left as you were before, and neither richer nor wiser, unless the sense of service rendered to a man in mortal distress may be counted as a kind of riches of the soul. Or, if you shall so prefer to choose, a new province of knowledge and new avenues to fame and power shall be laid open to you here, in this room, upon the instant, and your sight shall be blasted by a prodigy to stagger the unbelief of Satan.
Sir. This is that's great. This is the should you eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil speech put into this kind of new scientific dilemma. What are we doing and what are we discovering and how does this further people? The overreach, dilemma of science fiction, and this happens in Frankenstein too. The challenge, when science challenges the traditional ways of thinking and ideas and the ways of God and the way their religion has guided what they do in pursuing science, and you get it from the satanic figure too, which I love.
It's amazing, and I love that the next response is, "Sir."
Affecting a coolness that I was far from truly possessing. You speak enigmas. And then he says finally, but I have gone too far in the way of inexplicable services to pause before I see the end. I mean, Lanyon needs to see it. He's got the curious thing in him. I have to see this through. Lanyon has to open the door. Utterson won't open the door until he's forced, and then he has to break it down with an axe. It seems to me that Lanyon would open the door, like he does here, and he's opening the door here. Given the opportunity, I'm saying, okay, let me see what's behind the door.
Well, this is potentially the difference between, the caricatures of the scientist / doctor and the lawyer. The lawyer doesn't want to see stuff he doesn't have to, because he doesn't want, to be liable, or doesn't want, that just get in the way, whereas the doctor is motivated by the sort of intellectual curiosity, but also something like Hippocratic, where if there's like a way he
Yeah.
can intervene, he needs to. And I think that caricature divide is really interesting.
Monty, let's see what's behind curtain number 3. I gotta see it. Um, so he does. He watches him take the potion. Hyde reminds him what follows is under the seal of our profession, meaning the Hippocratic Oath, the privacy of patients. That is part of the Hippocratic Oath then, and is now it's also law.
Right.
But then it's just this agree. The doctors agree not to reveal
No,
this,
no,
and
it's a lot.
they reveal it to everybody. And now it's at least illegal. But he says, "You who have so long been bound," Hyde says, "to the most narrow and material views, you who have denied the virtue of transcendental medicine, you who have derided your superiors, behold." And he drinks the potion, and then we get the scene, a cry, he staggers, clutches at the table, um, uh, staring with injected eyes, gasping with open mouth. This is like, I mean, people like, and then it was performed on stage soon after, and then movies, and like actors like, yes, I want to do this scene. And then he seemed to swell. His face became suddenly black, and the features seemed to melt and alter. And that's different. That's interesting choice there too. That because we
Mhm.
know that Hyde is what they keep calling swart at one point. That
Yeah.
he has a darker skin, which for these Victorians is savage, uncivilized, um, and and here it kind of goes entirely black, and then the features melt and alter, and then Lanyon's reaction, "Oh God," I screamed, "Oh God," again and again, for there before my eyes, pale and shaken and half fainting and groping before him with his hands like a man restored from death, there stood Henry Jekyll. The moment that must have been for the first readers, like, what? And I can imagine reading, then you go through and you keep like, what? Wait, and you go back, like, what did that just? Yep, they're the same. They're the same.
It's
Hyde is Jekyll.
it's such a good reveal. I mean, like I
And
love.
his reaction is fascinating because it kills him, basically.
Yeah.
I mean, it kills him to watch this, but he says, "My soul sickened at it. My life is shaken to its roots. The deadliest terror sits by me now. Yet I shall die incredulous, like this incredible thing happened." And then he says, "The moral turpitude that man unveiled to me, the moral, the base, shameful,
Yeah.
behavior, that's, turpitude. Um, the moral turpitude that man unveiled to me, even with tears of penitence." Um, the Jekyll's, now that he's Jekyll, that he's giving him, "I cannot even in memory dwell on it without a start of horror." Um, I mean, he tells us why he's so horrified, and that his soul is shaken, but why? I mean, why is that such a soul-shaking experience? Is it is this just a Victorian response to this, Olivia? Or is this no, I imagine if I saw it in person, I'd be fucking
Yeah.
freaked out. But
I think it's a combination of things because like for sure if I saw my old friend turn from this like, horrifying little creature who came into my house, I would be very surprised and appalled. But also I think his response is twofold beyond that sort of like universal, like if you saw your friend appear from someone else's body, like you would be alarmed. The first is that I think it's he's reacting to like what the science hath wrought, because
mhm.
he chooses to stay to watch something that he's never seen before. He's in too deep, but like he wants the knowledge of the experience, and the fact that like a bunch of potions and powders can produce there's a scientific explanation, that there's a way that this can be achieved in the sort of alchemical natural world. Is,
Hmm.
I think, like too horrifying or like too appalling or shocking for him to properly carry it in, because I mean the point of, I mean he's not simply a scientist, he's not a chemist, he's not a physicist like any of these other burgeoning disciplines, he's a doctor.
Yeah.
And that is sort of that sort of has a motivation of science accompanied by like a certain kind of like helpful morality, right? So like he's seeing something like horrifying that science has
And
produced.
so is Jekyll.
Yes,
Jekyll is the
exactly.
doctor. He's supposed to
Exactly.
have the same
Yep.
moral, being that he
Exactly.
is, and yet he's not. He's a murderer. He says at the end of the letter, like,
Right.
it's Hyde's a murderer.
Right.
So now I know that Jekyll is
Right.
the murderer.
And that's the other thing exactly that I was going to say, that Hyde is like he's coded in sort of these like obviously colonialist like savage terms, but he is sort of like the beast within all men, and the man that Lanyon sees rise from the ashes of like the Hyde body is someone who might in other circumstances be himself. So there's that like identification, that sort of realization that like we are all sort of savage, and I mean obviously using Victorian parlance, and it's in all of its problematic associations, but like there's a destabilizing of the idea of the civilized, like educated, erudite man who's separate from his base urges. And in that moment, Lanyon's like, oh God, like there's a way that this is all, that Jekyll is me, like je suis Jekyll, you know.
Is he the only one in this story that's not a hypocrite? Now I'm going to get into this a little bit later
Oh,
with
that's a great question.
Stevenson talking about hypocrite, because that's his idea behind this. They're all hypocrites. Jekyll's a
Right.
hypocrite because he does this and knows that he can commit evil and stay good. And Utterson's a hypocrite by protecting evil people,
Right.
Enfield is the same way. Um, and I wonder if Lanyon is there to be the person who is, I'm not a hypocrite. This is, you shouldn't do this. But then that again, that like I feel like really you just shouldn't do it. That's not really the answer. So I don't, it's not, he's not the one I think I'm supposed to think like he's the voice of reason. Um,
No.
but in this story, maybe he is. Or at least he's not a hypocrite like some of the others.
Yeah, I don't think he's a full hypocrite. I think there's a spectrum of hypocrisy, and he's definitely plotted along that line somewhere, but I don't think we can put him fully in that camp. Like obviously Jekyll's the extreme, and other characters sort of work their ways toward like a definition of hypocrisy that's like damning.
I mean,
But
I don't get any idea that Utterson is reading these letters and then is going to be so shocked he's going to die a fortnight
right,
later.
exactly. I mean, I think the only thing is just that Lanyon chooses to watch. Like
Yeah.
Lanyon, he bites the apple, and like there's a certain way, right, that when you choose that, you take on this, you take on sin. So maybe not a hypocrisy, but maybe he as a doctor should know better.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And it's a very apt comparison too, because it's not, that story isn't necessarily about knowledge. That's a story about morality, and it's the knowledge of good and evil.
Exactly.
And
Not factual.
here, but for Lanyon, that is exactly what it's about. It is and we'll find out in Jekyll's full statement, and we'll find out in this first part of it too. But that's what it is too. That your true natures are about these moral
Right.
sides to you. So, all righty.
Well, and for a long time, like the history of science is the history of morality. Like even with the humors, like the
Yeah.
human body is, the human body is a vessel for like uh holding inside human desires and urges and inclinations and whatnot, and understanding how those interact is like the goal of most of Western science.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's good. Yeah. Now I have to rethink all my humors. Um,
Can I ask? Can I
okay.
say something for like 1 second before we move to the Jekyll thing?
Yeah.
I don't know how to pronounce Dr. Lanyon's name, and I love it, but I don't. Hasty?
Oh, it's Hasty. Yeah, Hasty Lanyon. Yeah, I
I've
heard
never
Hasty
heard
before. Yeah.
I've never heard the name Hasty in my life.
Yeah, I have, and I've heard it. It's and as a British name, and I'm
It's not a nickname. It's just
I
it's a
don't
name.
think it's a nickname. I think it's a name. But someone can look it up and let us know. I'm pretty certain it's a name. And I've seen it before too. Um, but I don't know. They're already hitting with hasty pudding in the thing. But it is, yeah, it is hasty Lanyon. Or a Brit will tell me, what are you kidding me? It's hasty. What are you? So, um, but no, I've heard hasty before as a name. I don't know in what, but I have.
Amazing.
Or maybe now I'll be proven wrong. People say like, actually, Ed, the only instance ever is in this novel. I don't think
Ah,
so. Um,
this novel actually popularized the name.
um, let me take this moment before we get on to chapter 10. Let me take this moment to thank all of you for watching this episode. As a nonprofit organization, the Rosenbach Museum and Library depends on the generosity of friends and supporters like you to keep programs like this free and accessible to hundreds of fellow biblioventurers worldwide. And yes, worldwide. This show, definitely. New Zealand. Claire's watching from New Zealand. Thanks, Claire. I hope you will consider supporting the Rosenbach and this show by donation, which you can do at our website or by becoming a member. Membership gives you free museum admission, discounts on programs and courses, exclusive invitations to member-only events, and early access to registration. You can learn more about how to become a member on our website. Thank you to all of you who have donated or joined as members and helped us take this Biblioventure. And we are still running this special offer for new members if you become a member the day of a live stream. So if you can't join tonight, like because of whatever time it is, and you want to join and get the special offer, just wait till next Monday and join during the day next Monday. And you will get an additional month added to your membership. That's 13 months. So lots of great programs and courses at the Rosenbach. Many of our online courses have already filled up because people really want to take them. We have a one course that has room in it for this fall. That's the Jorge Luis Borges course,
Hey.
which is really cool. It has 2 slots left. So, and they're going to fill. It starts next week, this class. It's going to fill, but it's those 2 slots. One of those slots could be yours. All the other courses are full. So sorry. I'll be teaching a Dracula course that doesn't start until January. You can register for it now, and there's room in that because it doesn't start until January. And there will be more courses coming up in the winter and the fall, and lots more programs in person and online. So you can also join us on the Facebook group page, Biblioventures, Monsters, and Ghosts for lots more info, news, links, conversation, and fun about the stories we're covering. And you can always write to me at epettit@rosenbach.org. I love to hear from our audience. I had emails this week I was answering, and it's always great to hear from you guys. Back to our story. A couple people are looking up hasty. Hasty is a vintage name for inspiring compassion and resilience in a baby. This is what it means for a baby. There's an old English, Hastings.
Yeah,
Maybe
that's what I wonder.
Hastings.
I wonder if it was
Yeah,
a nickname for Hastings.
might be Hastings. So, all righty. But Google will tell you. So, but you need to know where your Google's pointing you to, obviously. So,
Especially with AI.
especially with AI compiling all this information and putting it together. All righty. Chapter 10. We're going to do half of this, or a little less than half, I think. Henry Jekyll's full statement of the case. Now, again, this is like a Sherlock Holmes, story, right? This is, the case here, and this is the final long confession we get to read. Uh, Especially in the early stories, we have this because then you get the study in Scarlet, you get the long story before, but in Sign of Four as well. Is there a story where they just like read a long story? I don't think so. They read a long confession at the end. I'm trying to think of one. There might be. But the way this starts, I think, is it's almost like are we reading a Dickens novel now? I was born in the year 18 to a large fortune, endowed besides with excellent parts, inclined to industry, fond of the respect of the wise and good among my fellow men, and thus, as might have been supposed, with every guarantee of an honorable and distinguished future. I almost think that Stevenson's poking fun at Dickens, those kinds of novels, Um, the
Fair, fair.
We also don't get an actual date. 18 dash. When is this story take place? A convention that happens in 18th and 19th century stories where people will give you like it's now, but we're not giving you the exact year. It's almost like maybe it's almost as if we're disguising, we're hiding the real, names have been changed to protect the innocent, kind of thing, right? That, this all happened because it's happening around, people could tell reading the story, this is a contemporary story. This is happening around now. But you don't know when exactly. Not that it's not that important to know when exactly, besides contemporary. I think contemporary is important for this story for its first readers. Not important anymore because we're not contemporary to them. But Stevenson has created such a story that has lasted. And of course, he didn't know he was doing that. And now I'm doing another drink. I won't even eat it. I'll just shake it there.
Yeah, what are you making? Same thing?
It's the
Or
same thing. Oh yeah, it's a second. Yeah, I finished the first. So
okay.
time for another. But this Jekyll's now telling I'm gonna tell my life story. And he starts it like, I'm a good guy. The
Yeah.
worst of my faults was a certain impatient gaiety of disposition. Really? The,
I doubt that, buddy.
the
I have
dude that's got a
a
hide in him.
hard time believing that.
Um, yeah, I concealed my pleasures, and this made me committed to a profound duplicity of life. I mean, it really sounds like he's not being completely honest. This certain gaiety of impatient gaiety of disposition is not something you need to create a hide for. It's not something you need
No,
to separate from yourself.
absolutely not. Unless, once again, this intersects with the novel's like sneaky themes of homosexuality.
Yes. Um, and he talks about and then but there's something going on that he can't let out there and he has to suppress. And he says, I hid them, these views, these irregularities, I hid them with an almost morbid sense of shame. That whatever it is that Jekyll is interested in doing or thinking, it's shameful to him. Um, and actually, it's from the language in this and the way people write about masturbation in the Victorian age. Lots of critics thinks like, how could anybody at the time reading this not think that he's talking about masturbation?
Interesting.
Which was a very, there was a lot of shame and sin around that, and they really thought this was like this crazy awful thing you can do. So but Stevenson's not going there, and
No.
I'll get to that in a minute in this one letter because he really wants to keep it vague. But before I even get to that, this idea that he says he calls himself, though so profound a double dealer, I was in no sense a hypocrite. Both sides of me were in dead earnest. I was no more myself when I laid aside restraint and plunged in shame than when I labored in the eye of the day at the furtherance of knowledge or the relief of sorrows and sufferings. Um, and This double dealer, this really makes me think of Deacon Brodie. Talked
Sure.
about this last week. But Jekyll thinks that this doesn't make him a hypocrite, because I'm also earnest in the sin. You're still a hypocrite. if you're if you're hiding that and leading a life that says I don't do this kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, buddy.
But this is I mean I think Stevenson's very aware that he's
Yeah.
definitely writing an unreliable narrator here. That he's
Mhm.
writing that he has a narrator here who isn't telling us exactly the truth.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't be that's not just a modern way of reading a story, that this is something that I think people at his time clearly could pick up on,
Yeah.
but not all do. And you get so many, there's sermons given on Jekyll and Hyde after it comes out and it's so popular. And preachers think, oh, because they kind of take him at face value and think
His word. Yeah.
it's a story about a good guy who's trying to get rid of the evil in him. So much in the story speaks otherwise to that.
Yeah.
There we go. We have another blue and orange, and then it's going to blend.
Beautiful.
All right. The Jekyll and Hyde. Here's the letter that Stevenson wrote in 1887. I mean, just after this is published, a year after it's published. Let me share this. This is a letter to John Paul Bocock. This letter exists in the Huntington Library. This is the collection that it's from. And it's November 1887. And he says, Hyde, and he's answering this respondent about the novel. Maybe he had said that, like, oh, that Jekyll was some kind of sex addict or something. And then he says, Stevenson wrote, Hyde was the younger of the two. He was not good looking, however, and not, great gods, a mere voluptuary. There is no harm in a voluptuary, and none, with my hand on my heart and in the sight of God, none, no harm whatever in what prurient fools call immorality. The harm was in Jekyll because he was a hypocrite, not because he was fond of women. He says so himself. But people are so filled full of folly and inverted lust, he means the readers,
Right.
that they can think of nothing but sexuality. The hypocrite let out the beast Hyde, who is no more sensual than another, but who is the essence of cruelty and malice and selfishness and cowardice, and these are the diabolic in man. Not this poor wish to have a woman that they make such a cry about. I know and I dare to say, you know as well as I, that bad and good, even to our human eyes, has no more connection with what is called dissipation than it has with flying kites. But the sexual field and the business field are perhaps the two best fitted for the display of cruelty and cowardice and selfishness. That is what people see, and then they confound. That we do know from the couple early drafts that exist, the couple early manuscripts, that he does give us more. He does give us more language from Jekyll, saying that he's like going around sinning and doing these, and then it sounds really like sexual practices. But in this final version, he pulls back on it, and it's very. Not only do we not know what he's doing, but if we're going to get it from Jekyll's point of view, then he's really going to sugarcoat it, and he's really going to, not say exactly what's going on. And the result of that is exactly what happened. That Stevenson is like, oh no, you're missing the point. But you're not missing the point if you really read it well. That people read in the sins that they want to, that they think are the most, shameful.
Well, there are like lacunae enough in Hyde's characterization that can allow for this, is because, as you said, like he pulled back and he didn't include sort of more details. So there's so much to read into Hyde's activity.
Yeah. And people, and if you're adapting this story in some way, you've got to show something that Hyde's doing instead of just one murder You know,
Eh,
there needs to be some, and we found out that Utterson's like, he told Jekyll before, I've heard stories about Hyde. What stories? I want to hear. I want to know what those stories are.
Kicking down kids.
Yeah.
That's it.
So, yeah, who were fine.
Yeah, they're okay.
Hyde was the one blackmailed.
He's actually the victim here.
It kind of was. Like in the totality of that story, he's kind of the victim. I hurt the kid. Maybe I should have stopped and said, "Are you okay? I'm sorry," but he didn't. Because it turned out the kid was okay.
Just fine.
They but uh, but but Jekyll's point of view here is that, you know, he's just got some things that, you know, that he likes to do, and that leads him to this perennial war among my members, which then makes me think of like, well, it's not just a little thing then that's bothering you or that you're ashamed of. And then it comes up with the idea that man is not truly one but truly two. And I love this part because then he says others will follow, others will outstrip me on the same lines, and I hazard the guess that man will be ultimately known for a mere polity of multifarious, incongruous, and independent denizens. So we're not just it's not just the duality, man, it's the plurality
Mm-hmm.
of people, that we all have these things inside it. And it's not just and we have to recognize too here that for Stevenson and for the age he's writing, he's not talking about identity. He's not talking about gender. He's talking about the natures of consciousness, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which for them have everything to do with morality. And for what will happen with Freud, who he will later posit like the id, the ego, the superego. It's about your consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And Jekyll wants to separate those things inside himself.
Yes.
On the moral side and in my own person, that I learned to recognize the thorough and primitive duality of man, two natures contended in the field of my consciousness. Did Freud ever mention Jekyll and Hyde? I wonder, because he mentions other works that he's read.
Freud is a great reader of
Yeah.
fiction, especially fiction in genres like this.
This
Right, like
surprised me that
Hoffman.
Freud hadn't read this, but I don't know if he ever actually mentioned it.
I'm Googling.
Jekyll says, I was radically both. I'm both. He says he'll go back and forth here, where he denies that he's Hyde and also where he says that he's Hyde. I was radically both. And he says, if each, I told myself, could be housed in separate identities, life would be relieved of all that was unbearable. The unjust might go his way, delivered from the aspirations and remorse of his more upright twin, and the just could walk steadfastly and securely on his upward path, doing the good things in which he found his pleasure, and no longer exposed to disgrace and penitence. This is Utterson's philosophy. Let my brother go to the devil in his own way. That Jekyll wants to separate his natures so he won't feel guilty about the bad things that he does. I'm not culpable. It's Hyde, right?
Not me. Yeah.
You know, but what we know by this point too is that Jekyll protects Hyde.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just like Hyde's off doing bad things. That's got nothing to do with me. He's making sure Hyde is able to do it.
Yes.
Gives him an apartment, sets him up with a nice bank account. I mean, he sets himself up. And he sets himself up with a nice bank account, protects himself from the law by writing this fake letter, provides for him in the will, which is the weirdest thing, because what that means is that Jekyll's thinking, maybe I'll want to be Hyde forever. And then I'm going to want to have all my money. If I disappear, decide not to come back, because when he sets that will up, he's still, Hyde hasn't come that part hasn't taken control where he transforms automatically.
Right.
He's still in control. I take the potion. So when he sets the will up, that's really about him saying, Well, if I decide to stay Hyde, if I'm having more fun as Hyde, then I want to be able to have 250,000 pounds sterling to support my lifestyle.
Yeah.
And that's makes him culpable. And but he feels like it's not. But what he says is, I'm not, like, I won't be culpable because I'm separating the two parts of my nature. And he also acknowledges that it's a failure, that I failed in this because he says they were in Hyde, they were the expression and bore the stamp of lower elements in my soul. I hadn't thought that that kind of real evilness would come out of me, and that's all it would be. And
That I believe.
Yeah, but that's also just being blind to what you're doing. That's what you set out to do, but now you're faced with that,
Yep.
literally faced in the mirror with looking at it. And then I knew well that I risked death. And he decides he's going to take the drug himself. This is not unusual for 19th century doctors. Which is amazing.
Not unusual.
There's that whole series of documents of Conan Doyle experimenting on himself, taking drugs to figure out what's gonna, and taking poisons in little doses, just a little bit of poison. Let's just see what's gonna happen. Do it over time. Work this out. Write down everything like Lanyon would do. Doctors did this then. Experimented on themselves to figure out the efficacy of the drugs and the treatments they were giving to people. And then he talks about his first transformation. Again, this is I think this is a Frankenstein. Late one accursed night, I compounded the elements. It was one dreary night in November when I beheld the accomplishment of my toils. Is Frankenstein. The language there seems to match a little bit. Or watch them boil and smoke together in the glass. This is Jekyll again. When the ebullition had subsided, and with a strong glow of courage, drank off the potion. And usually this is how adaptations start. Well, adaptations start where we introduce to the characters, and Jekyll's like, oh, you people, I'm not crazy, and I'm going to further mankind and help everybody. He's always a really, really good guy in the beginning of that.
Yeah, stand-up guy.
But then he takes a potion and changes. Here, we don't get this till the end. So takes the potion, and then we get his first transformation. We've seen a transformation from Hyde into Jekyll, but now we're getting the description of the very first one. There was a grinding in the bones. Boy, that sounds painful. As his body is transformed. Reminds me of what we see now in really good werewolf movies, where the body transforms. It was first seen in The Howling and American Werewolf. We really see that body changing and how painful that must be. And then he changes, and there was something strange in my sensations, something indescribably new, and from its very novelty, incredibly sweet. I felt younger, lighter, happier in body, conscious of a heady recklessness, a current of disordered sensual images, an unknown but not an innocent freedom of the soul. I knew myself at the first breath of this new life to be more wicked, tenfold more wicked, sold a slave to my original evil. But it also braced and delighted me like wine. I stretched out my hands, exulting in the freshness of the sensations. But I was aware that I had also lost in stature. I was also smaller. Younger, happier, wicked, but smaller, and it's like his first shot of this drug.
Yep.
Very much, puts me in mind of descriptions of this, the first drug use, and what they say is like that's what you're always chasing afterwards.
Exactly.
The first time you get that great feeling, and then all the rest of the times that's what you're trying to get again. or alcohol use here, as he's quite aware of. But it's not. He's not revulsed. He's not like, this isn't, this is horrible. This isn't like the first creature in Frankenstein. Um, uh, he says, there is no mirror. And then I cross the yard because he's got to get to the house where the mirror. I cross the yard where in the constellations, the stars look down upon me, and I could have thought with wonder the first creature of that sort that their unsleeping vigilance had yet disclosed to them. That this is a wonderful moment for him, and how that contrasts with the Frankenstein story. In which the creature isn't the same person. I mean, there's that whole doubleness going on in Frankenstein, but they're really not. It's not the same being like here. And that creature describes going out and looking at the sky and out on the wild, but he's cold and freezing and alone. But with Jekyll, it's really exciting. And the creature in Frankenstein is rejected, cast out, and then rejected by everyone he encounters, and he becomes a monster. Here, Hyde is actually embraced by the creator, which is himself, but his form also does make him a pariah to everyone else, like the creature in Frankenstein, and he becomes a monster. So it's that in both stories, it's the way everyone else reacts to you. But actually, in the Frankenstein creature story, had Victor responded well, everything would have been different. So
very different. If he had just acknowledged his own son.
But there's a lot of parallels here. And then he says, I saw for the first time the appearance of Edward Hyde. Why Edward? Now, I don't just ask that because my name's Edward. I love the fact that he's Edward Hyde. But this Hyde, we know. Hyde's obvious. Jekyll's using his persona to hide himself. That makes sense that he would come up with Hyde for it. That's why Stevenson uses it. But Edward's a kind of deliberate choice. I mean, or it's an unconscious one, right? Like Stevenson knows some evil Edward and he's giving him the name, but it's not necessarily an evil name, is it?
Oh,
I don't know. No. I think Edward Rochester, maybe, from Jane Eyre.
I mean, sometimes it's just like, oh, what name sounds good with this syllabically? Like if people are reading it aloud. Do we like Edmund Hyde, Edgar Hyde? Oh, Edward.
For whatever reason, Stevenson was like, Edward Hyde. That's it.
It's old Eddie Hyde.
So, but it is interesting that he gives him a name and he doesn't explain it to us. In my memory, I thought he had, or maybe I read somewhere that somebody else wrote it. I don't know if Stevenson sent in a letter. I have a memory of this, but I can't figure out where it's from now. But he's just Edward Hyde, like automatically. Jekyll doesn't, the way we have the story, Jekyll just like, and it's Edward Hyde. Like I don't have to explain it because that's who it is. Like it's instinctual. It's inherent in his being that this is the name of this person. We find out now, he says, the evil, and this is from looking in the mirror and at himself, the evil side of my nature to which I had now transferred the stamping efficacy was less robust and less developed than the good, which I had just deposed. Even as the good shone upon the countenance of the one, evil was written broadly and plainly on the face of the other. There was an imprint of deformity and decay. When I looked upon that ugly idol in the glass, I was conscious of, he's just described them as like evil and deformed and decayed. And then he says, I was conscious of no repugnance, rather of a leap of welcome. This too was myself. This too was myself. Okay. Jekyll, Hyde, they're the same. And he's admitted it here. Now he'll say that he's not later. Here he says he is. It seemed natural and human. In my eyes, it bore a livelier image of the spirit. And he's not dehumanizing himself because he's talking about the image. It is for the image. That's the image he's looking at. It seemed more express and single than the imperfect and divided countenance I had been hitherto accustomed to call mine. Like it's more, I'm seeing myself as I am. This is the honest me, is what he's saying. Which again is there's a scene in Frankenstein in which he sees himself for the first time in a reflection of the water, and he's horrified, and he's like, "Oh my, why am I a monster?" And calls himself a monster after he sees himself reflected in the water. This time, the creature to his creator, but it's himself, is welcome and honest. This is who I should be, right? Um, None could come near to me at first without a visible misgiving of the flesh. That's a problem. This, as I take it, was because all human beings, as we meet them, are commingled out of good and evil, and Edward Hyde, alone in the ranks of mankind, was pure evil. Um, he's less developed. Again, think evolution, but he's also he's pure evil, he says, which posits that humans, well, he says that humans are not naturally good, but like we have both.
Right.
And but he's all evil. And people could sense that, I guess, and people believe that you can sense evil in others. I mean, I wish that were true because there'd be a lot less opportunity for bad people, if you could really sense what people, I'd know who the murderers are.
Factors are. Yeah, exactly.
But and that's what they certainly believe that we can tell you're evil by the way you look. And it's this backward construction here. It's constructed in reverse. The belief is that if someone looks this way, they are evil, and here's the proof. This guy's all evil, and this is the way he looks. Well, he is at and then he says, well, uh-oh, I better take it again and see if it'll turn me back. And he does, and he takes the potion so he can turn back in the Jekyll because, he couldn't just, like, imagine if he couldn't turn back. He'd be like, well, you're stuck now. No, but this is all mine. I'm really Jekyll, out in the street.
Yeah. Be a very different story, Ed.
He changes back, and now he assesses everything, and this is where we'll end. And that he's come to this fatal crossroads. Had I approached my discovery in a more noble spirit, had I risked the experiment while under the empire of generous or pious aspirations, all must have been otherwise. But instead, and I would have come forth an angel instead of a fiend. But the drug had no discriminating action, and I find that fascinating. That's the way he's describing it there. Mm-hmm. He's not describing it as the choice that I'm making. He's saying the drug had no discriminating action. It was neither diabolical nor divine, but it but shook the doors of the prison house of my disposition. And at that time, my virtue slumbered. My evil, kept awake by ambition, was alert and swift to seize the occasion, and the thing that was projected was Edward Hyde. Hence, although I had now two characters as well as two appearances, one was wholly evil, and the other was still the old Henry Jekyll, the incongruous compound of whose reformation and improvement I had already learned to despair. The movement was thus wholly toward the worse. So here he is. At this is where we are now. This is what we're talking. Of course, he's talking about how he's at the fatal crossroads, and how he's just gonna, that would be the left, right? I'm gonna go to the left. That's the sinister side. Go to the left, down the road there of evil. All righty, now we're going to continue next week to finish. Any final thoughts on that? This duality, this evil that he has become, or that he is it? I mean, is it like, oh my God, I've discovered that this is awesome to be just evil? Is that,
yeah.
is that Is that what?
Yeah. Although I had now two characters as well as two appearances. One was wholly evil, and the other was still the old Henry Jekyll, that incongruous compound of whose reformation and improvement I had already learned to despair. He is done with being Jekyll. He's ready for this new thing. This is like, he's buddy love, but the evil version.
Was that comedy Jekyll and Hyde together again? It was like a comedy from like the
I was thinking of the Nutty Professor.
70s or early 80s. Yes, there's also the Nutty Professor,
Yeah.
which is Jekyll and Hyde adaptation.
Buddy love Mr. Hyde. No, I think he's embracing this completely. He says the movement was thus wholly toward the worse, but it's not, it's worse in an objective sense, not in the sense that he is like,
Yeah.
oh, this struck my, excuse me, this ruined my life. He's like, this is the problem that I am embracing because it's different and it's exciting.
Well, one of the things that we'll get to is that, when we finish this is we'll continue with his full statement, and we'll have an awful lot to say about his culpability, his responsibility. But the big question is for me, for everybody to think about going into the final part of just the story, is how is he able to kill himself as Hyde at the end? Like at what point, is it despair? Is it despair that I'm going to get caught? Is it Jekyll's despair? That's clearly because I'm not just Hyde, I am still Jekyll too. And that's something that we'll really get into. Well, one of the things we'll get into next week. Biblioventurers, thank you for joining us for episode 4 of Monsters and Ghosts. Olivia, thank you for joining me. You will return next week to talk about these questions with Paul Chapman.
Can't wait.
And the three of us will discuss the end of the book. That'll be lots of fun to have all three of us on. Our co-host schedule is available on our webpage, and you'll see there at the final episode, Leslie Klinger will join me to discuss the legacy of Jekyll and Hyde.
Amazing. It's an amazing next few weeks.
It will be. Thanks to our chat pool, Brianna, for managing the live chat links. We couldn't do these shows also without the generous support of our patrons. You can support the Rosenbach through donation. Your support helps us create more programs like this and also care for our collections. You can also become a member. Membership gives you early access and discounts to programs and courses. You can find out more at our website, rosenbach.org. And remember, if you are watching live and become a member right now, you receive an additional month added to your membership, 13 months, or you can just do it next Monday at any time during the day of the show. You get that deal. Again, let me remind you to subscribe to this channel, to like these videos. Bye, Olivia. Thanks. All right,
Thanks
everybody.
for having me.
What's that?
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Oh, good. I am Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenbach Museum and Library, where the door to your biblioventure is always open. Thanks, everyone. Good night. Or good day. Depends on when
Where you are.
this. All righty. We are all done. Yep, good. It's just still, but it's not streaming.